All right, well, thank you everybody in advance for coming out today. I am William Downs, and I am a drawer. I love drawing. It's been something that I've been doing since I was this big. My first drawing was in my mom's bathroom on the wall. We were getting ready to go to church. I was like maybe crawling around, and she was doing her eye makeup, and she dropped a pencil but got distracted. When she came back in, I had that pencil in my hand making drawings on the wall. So it's kind of a full circle, but I'll talk about everything in between. But I kind of realized and thought about that moment of, it's probably the only visual moment that I had as a little kid, was making marks on the wall. And then I think my mom thought that that was going to be a problem. So as I grew older, they put me in advanced classes for drawing, and I went to art camps. I even went to art high school in Greenville, South Carolina. It was one of the first magnet schools, started in 1973. I went there, and I can't remember when I was a freshman, but I did 4 years there. And then another crazy thing is I'll be doing one of these at that school in December. So I'm making some circles right now, which is really frightening, because I'm like, what is going on in the universe? Going to the Maryland Institute for my master's was probably one of the biggest moments of my life, because it's such a good school. Studying interdisciplinary art was what I was there doing. So I was making drawings, but they were all small, and I was making thousands of them. So I turned myself into a drawing machine when I was in graduate school. In graduate school, I was showing all over the place, and it was easy to ship work when it was small. So I got away with that, and when I graduated from MICA, I ended up teaching printmaking for 2 years, and then the drawing and painting department stole me. So I taught advanced drawing and drawing 1. Those are my 2 favorite classes to do, because one was the beginning practical element stuff, and then the other one was more advanced, trying to do inventive things with drawing. So with that, tools are very important to me, and when I moved to New York, I didn't want to leave MICA, so I commuted for 3 hours on Amtrak. Turned the cafe car into my studio, and that's where I worked for 8 years, because I couldn't stop working. I was showing and making art for the money, all of that stuff, but that was something that trained me to be ready to work no matter where you are and what you're doing, so I can adapt anywhere. Long story short, I'll move to my last installation, which is at the Maryland Institute College of Art right now. Actually, they started painting over it on Monday, so it should be painted over by now. So about my process, I use ink wash because it's such a complicated, hard medium and material, because you're dealing with water and ink and paper. They all have a different life, and they all work differently when they're put together. So for me, I like that chance. I love how the figures can be dreamy, washy, ghostly. I love the figure. I taught figure drawing for 10 years of my life. So I've been a part of helping people learn the structure and learn how to make the body. Whereas in my work, I break it apart and I create these fantastic fantasy figures who are dreamlike, a ghost-like. The black silhouette is the anchor, is what I call them. Keeps everything into the context of what the story is. They're either looming or participating or caretaking or balancing or observing. So those are the things that I love about being an artist, because we observe life and we create it into a different scenario, whether it's fantasy or real. And I love that because in my brain, that's kind of how I see every day. I think about my work 24 hours a day. I probably make work half of that. I wake up at 5 o'clock every day, even if days are hard the day before. But drawing is where I start. I start with a coffee, and I sit down at my table, and I make a few drawings before I go to the office, which is my studio. And there, it's a mix of organizing all the time, or figuring out what tools I need. And if I'm going to places like this, I have to figure out how, or make my plan in order to get there. What am I going to draw? What am I thinking about? What am I listening to? Those are the things that fuel what I make. I love basic tools that I kind of gather, mostly because I like to explore a new way of finding something. Ink wash is that medium where you don't know what's going to happen, but once you start, you just have to follow. I don't edit, so every mark that I make, even if it's a mistake, it stays on the drawing or on the wall. And I love that because it shows that I'm not a machine. I like awkwardness. We remember things that are awkward more than we remember things that are perfect. So problem solving happens when something goes astray, or when there's something that interferes with my installations. The last one, there were these big vents that were placed at the top of the walls. So I was like, "Argh!" It breaks up the smoothness. So what I did was I drew on the vents to create a different kind of connection to the architecture. So I brought it into the life. Kind of like this hook that you see hanging up there, I drew into the shadows to create another dimension and to put the hardware to use. So it's kind of a funny thing that happens when you're standing in a room for hours and days. You find the complications in the room that you can take into your work and become another connection to something. So that's my connection to the space. So let's see, talk about that. So now I will show you kind of how I start my works on paper, which then when I go to the wall, I try to do the same thing, except for I have to think about how paper responds to medium different than the wall. The wall doesn't really absorb unless there is some spackle or some imperfections on the wall where the ink will soak into it. But other than that, you have to do layers. I try my best to, I want to have at least 2 layers. Sometimes if I'm energized enough, I'll do 3 layers to make the blacks get blacker. I chose this ink because it does give you a super black, like the name. I've tried every ink and they all get really cool or blue or gray when you add water to it, which is beautiful for paper. But for me and the wall, this black is the most solid. One thing about my wall drawings is I'll make them for at least 4 to 5 days, sometimes 12 to 8 hours. This one I work from 9 till 7, 2 days. Today's day 3. With that, endurance becomes my hero because I have to think about all of the small things that go into making this. And with that, it takes time and patience and steadiness. So I choose to use round brushes a lot because they give me the points, and I love lines. Line is my favorite thing about drawing, and it's because I was a printmaker, and layering of line is something that shows depth and movement. So for me, I'm always thinking about how movement is operating with the head, how you turn around or how you look up and down. So I'm trying to capture that with my figures because there's this conversation that's always happening. They're always interacting with each other somehow. Tenderness or carefulness. During the pandemic, I really did think about how we used to gather as friends or gather at openings, but then there was a moment where there was no gathering. So I took that and put that hardcore in my work. I wanted more gathering. So a lot of my figures became more clustered and more about the tenderness and being in lines and touching and just trying to be together because we had this year where we were not together. So that kind of affected me a little bit. Somewhat of a social person, but I'm an observer. Living in New York for a long time, being surrounded by so many people, you could learn how to disappear, but still be a part of people. During that time, I would watch people, and I would always watch how people grab things or drink things, and then I would bring that into my work. Like if someone was stumbling down the street, I would try to bring that person's language into the work. So I'm always thinking about the body. I'm always thinking about memory, movement, and line all together to combine to make these whimsical figures. Stretching is always a part of the work. There's always a figure leaping or moving across the screen. I was a runner for a long time, so I think about when I'm running and I'm cutting through life. I'm just looking at things as a blur because I'm moving really quickly. So that's another thing that I'm bringing into the drawings. There's always someone moving across the screen. Michael Jordan is one of my heroes. So I think about how Michael is inhuman because he can fly. He can stretch through people. So watching him growing up, and then now when I'm figuring out my figures, I'll look at an old YouTube of Michael Jordan and I'll slow down the screen, make a few drawings of his body, cutting through a bunch of bodies, and then I'll bring it into the studio and do something with it. Or I'll put it in my back pocket and wait till I do something bigger where I'll have him stretching across a 20-foot wall or 10-foot wall. And then I have my figures kind of roping around that to show the gatheringness. So each story sometimes doesn't have a real theme. I'm really obsessed with how writers can create characters and create stories and drama, narratives, and we all follow. We all feel from that. Same thing with musicians. They can sing a song and you feel something from that and you remember that song forever. So with that, I'm trying to put that into my work so that memory and feelings will stay with you. And with that, you think about how I draw straight on the wall, and then at the end of the show, most times I go back and I paint over it, and then that's the end. So I give it a beginning and an end because for me, we remember things that once were there a lot stronger. At least I do. So it's kind of a Zen activity for me because yogis and yoga are so important to my practice and to me as a human. I love that people can transform their bodies to do things like levitate or stretch or headstand. Balance is something that's really exciting to me. People can balance themselves with their body. Strength, movement, elegance with gesture. The gesture is always a part of the work. And if you do life drawing, you know that you have to do gesture drawing before you draw the figure when it's sitting or standing or moving. So I bring the gesture into the work all the time. The cactus has been a new component. I guess it happened 4 years ago. I was in the desert in New Mexico. I was thinking about how cactus are so beautiful and so strong and full of water and life. With that, I was thinking about how my figures needed something to protect them from things. So yoga is something that I think about, and I think about how people spend a lot of money on their outfits for yoga. So I thought, I want to put those two together. So that's where I came up with the cactus suit. It's not for to hurt them, it's to protect them. So a lot of people think of barbed wire and stuff like that. I'm like, no, 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 no. There's no penetration, there's no blood. Everybody's zen, everybody's happy. So it's their uniform that protect themselves from whatever's gonna affect them. So that's one of the things that carry out through when you look at my whole history of drawings in the last 5 years, these cactus suit guys. Another thing that I'm using the cactus for too, if you squint your eyes, it's like this movement that happens. So the graphic quality of that is something that's important to me. I try to balance all of my drawings out by squinting or taking my glasses off so that there is a sound that's being made by the rhythm of the marks, the movement of the marks, the lines that have marks, and then there's value that changes, and then there'll be marks on top of that. So I like to push the viewer in and out with my different layers of composition. The landscape is not a true landscape on the bottom. The top is usually the landscape of New Mexico. And then everything else in between are just different sections of the life that's happening within the context of the drawing. Hieronymus Bosch is someone that kind of gave that to me in a way, because you think about a lot of his work, there's like this unevenness, but there's some depth that happens with the size and the scale of his figures. So I'm thinking about that with my figures. Sometimes they're really small because they're in the distance, or they're really big because I want you to see them in the foreground. Kerry James Marshall is another person that I'm really obsessed with. And when I found out years ago that he was obsessed with Caravaggio, then I thought, okay, cool. Those two legends are the two people that I'm going to bring into my world and think about how they lay out their compositions and how they put their figures in the situation that creates the depth and the narrative. So I think that's it. And usually there's an iPhone person who's documenting everything. So I think about how now we all document everything that we see, whether good or bad, happy or sad, we're always documenting it. So I'm bringing that into the work, and I'm talking about how we spend a lot of time in our screen, or we're photographing or listening to music, and it shows the power of the phone and how we rely on it so much. So if you had talked to me 5 years ago, that would not be in my work or be in my mind, because I was such a traditionalist. Never thought about technology until 5 years ago. Animation is something that I'm really obsessed with now. So I'm bringing that screen into my larger screen. So I'm making a lot of animations that kind of make my drawings move in the screen world. Whereas in the real world, I'm trying to do that with line. So having that animation is another window that I'm bringing into the work. What else? Scale is usually, it always helps me figure out my narrative or the way that I want the viewer to see the work. Smaller things are kind of like the notes that I'm making for the big things. And usually I'll combine the two together when there's a huge event. I work primarily with paper, canvas, on the drywall, and panels. And usually they all kind of work with whatever I'm working with or whatever I'm called to do in terms of commission work or gallery installations or museum shows. And with that, I kind of think about how I combine the two together sometimes. Like I brought this one because I've always loved this one. It was in a show last summer called Long Runner, but I wanted this one to come in and be the anchor of this show. And when I saw the scale of the gallery online, I thought it would be the perfect thing to start from, or something to bring in that already has a moment that's happening, so that I can make things towards it or around it. Cave art is something that I really do love, and I think about how the caves bring you in and bring you out, And I think about how they talk about what's happening in the valley or in the region. They leave the evidence. So for me, I'm thinking about my caves, how I start really light and I make them really dense towards the end. And it's kind of like how you read a book, or thumb through a book, you go from back to front sometimes. So that's how I like to read. And since we come into the gallery this way, I wanted it to be a light scale to heavy scale. I love the reflection that the gallery makes because it reflects the drawing and gives it more depth. So when I walked in, I was like, okay, I want some black figures right here so that they can be headed out when you close the door or open the door. There's this beautiful reflection of life that happens when you look from outside, inside. Usually I have plants that I spray paint as stencils on the drawings, but in museums and galleries who don't like that, I don't bring that element in. But sometimes I sneak it in, but most times I don't. So I think I've covered a lot of my intel. Eyes, I forgot about eyes. There are always eyes either looking directly at the viewer, engaging the viewer, or looking away, or a pile of eyes that kind of surface in random spots. That's my way of thinking about observation, or thinking about how people are watching us and them. And I usually reflect them to souls, how the eye can tell the doctor what's wrong with you. When they look into your eye, they can see everything in your soul. So that's something that kind of swims in my head when I'm thinking about eyes, and when I'm placing them in the context of the narratives. There's usually guys walking on their hands, and they're always looking at something that's happening. And that's another form of balance. And I always think about how the hands can be connected to the ground like roots. And humans are kind of like trees in a way. So I think about how we grow up to the sky. And yeah, so those are weird things that I think about. So with the ink wash on paper, I usually bring in simple, bare tools because I've edited everything out of my life in terms of having the best of everything, like the best brushes or the best tools. Like, I'm not a tool guy, I'm not a tech guy. I just like raw, bare things. So sticks are some of my favorite things to draw with. It's easy, you can find them anywhere there's a tree, but I usually find one that fits my hand or feels good, or ones that are really awkward so that I can get a really strange line. I know I keep saying awkward and strange, but I feel like those things interest me. I feel like having things that you like make your work feel so much better. So sponges I use for making textures, and I learned this from working for a faux painting company. They had these very expensive sponges that you would just carefully dip into the paint, and they would make sure that you didn't damage them for some reason. And I would always damage them because, sorry?
They're sponges, they're like damageable.
Yeah, they are. I know, it's funny. So with that, I try to use them to create my landscapes. Also, it goes back to my love for printmaking. You can make prints with sponges if you want to. But they just do really beautiful, unique marks. And then when I go to paper, they can do the same thing. So I'll turn it upside down. And I broke my paper up into 4 spots because it was rolled. I like to use dirty water to start these drawings, and it's because I like to tarnish the white void so that there's no intimidation or any fear of ruining the beautiful paper that probably costs a lot. But you're already going to put your mark on it, so getting it started this way for me helps get rid of that anxiety of screwing up. So the face is usually what I always start with when I'm making these drawings. And usually spirals or circles start them for me. And then I'll wander around like walking through the forest until I find something that's interesting about the figure. Or if there's someone I met or saw at a cafe or grocery store or walking down the street, I'll try to remember that expression that they were holding. And then I'll come into the studio or like here, try to find that face.
Is that just black paint and without water in that black cup?
This is straight black.
Straight.
Yes, straight black. And I'll start with the hard black line because I'll soften it up with my friend the sponge. I love how the water just spreads and it creates a really beautiful atmospheric quality. And with that tones and values, I'll just try to find as I move it around. And in my brain, I already think about light and how I want it to reflect on the figure. So I'll think about the shadows last and that first. But when you look at my drawings in real life, you'll see that there's always this underline that's sort of going through the figure that feels like a gesture. Oops. But I love how when the ink hits the water, it spreads and becomes a really beautiful mark. Drips are something that will happen if you're not careful with ink wash. Over time, I feel like I've developed a really good sense of keeping my brushes at an angle so that I don't have any drips. And as you can see here, there aren't any drips. And usually it's pretty hard. And I feel like the more I do these, the better I become. And I think that's why I like it. It's a challenge and I don't feel content or I don't feel bored with this because there's always something happening that I have to pay attention to.
When drips happen, do you incorporate them or do you try to get rid of them?
Good question. I try to do both. I try to find something that the drip reminds me of, or I'll take it and do something with it. And then sometimes I'll leave it because it'll be that evidence of the hand or the human. I think my undergraduate school, which is the Atlanta College of Art, a lot of my friends were into drip art. So there's a lot of dripping that was happening. So I didn't like it, so I tried my best not to be a part of that. So yeah, I try my best not to drip, and I use mistakes to my advantage.
Do you plan out the large installations or are they spontaneous?
A mix. Usually when I'm invited to go to a place to do something, I will either show up the day before or I will plan ahead, and usually it's from things that I'm listening to. Music is very important to my work and me as a human. I think of my drawings as if you are a solo musician, you play the guitar and you travel around with you and the guitar. It's easy, it's portable, and then when you have a big band behind you, you have this huge sound, and so that's kind of how I think about it. Here, I brought that image as the plan, but most times, the bigger the space, the more I like to go in and just attack it fresh with nothing and just find something. So I kind of go back and forth. The only thing that I do have to plan are the drawings that come with, because the registrars, they need to know and value and stuff like that. So those are the things that are planned ahead, or for catalogs, stuff like that. But I like spontaneity because you always find something, you're vulnerable, but you gain something at the end. Like when I walk away from this, I'll be like, wow, this is such a great drawing. All these beautiful people are gonna experience it for 4 months, and then it's gonna go away. So for me, that's the beauty of spontaneity and chance.
What kind of music do you listen to?
Good question. I love everything, which is how I answer, but I edit that answer by, I listen to things that are quiet and melancholy, because a lot of my figures are, they're not sad, but they like that kind of sound, very bare. Sunrise, someone that I listen to because of the big sound and lots of layers of instruments. So when I'm doing the landscape or the skies or movement, I'll listen to Sun Ra or someone who's really fast. So yeah, that's my music. So the sponge is usually a really good thing for me to get value and graze, because you can control how much water goes in it and how much comes out. The round brush for me helps me move it across the surface really fast. I love the line that comes out of this brush.
Do you ever use colors?
Good question. I used to be so colorful, like if you squint, the black and white, think about color. That's what my work used to be like. I stopped making color, which I'm going to talk about in my lecture tomorrow night. So my father was my best friend. We talked every day for 40-something years before he passed away. He was always the person that I would talk to when there's a problem with the work or when I needed some questions about my work. And my dad was a Marine. He did 8 years in the Marines, and then he became an electrician for a weapons company. But he always had the right answers for me. So in 2018, was it 18 or 17, I was preparing for a solo show, and the paintings that I was working on and the drawings that were full of color, they weren't working for me. So when I went to visit my dad, he was in the hospital, and we were talking, and he was like, "What's up, man? You seem very low." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm preparing for a solo show at Sandler Hudson in less than a month or two, and I don't like the work that I'm working with." And we started talking, and then he said, "You should just do black and white." And I was like, whoa, why didn't I think about that? So after I left him, I jumped in my car, drove back to Atlanta. I put everything in the back of the studio that was color, and I bought a roll of paper, and I just started, I got the black ink, and I just started making ink drawings. And with that, they became really spontaneous and beautiful, and I started to feel really happy and excited. And then my dad passed away soon after, and then he wasn't able to come to my first solo show at San Luis Hudson, they had just picked me up, so he wasn't able to come to that. So I brought a plant that he gave me into the gallery. So he did see it that way. So these black and white drawings have been mostly for him. So now I'm going to incorporate the drawing. And usually I would rip it with a big level. So once the drawings are to my taste, I will install them onto the big wall drawings. And I picked out a spot here for these. And it might stay or it might go, I'm not sure yet. But for right now, this is what it's gonna live here. I might crop it down just a little bit more later on, but I just wanted you to see how the drawings evolve and become part of the installations. I'll probably cut it down just a little bit just to fit in the landscape, but it's gonna stay there. But the cartoon is definitely my favorite part of painting, and I think about that use of cartoon, which we think of funny cartoons, but painters use that word as the beginning. So yes, I love that. And that's what I feel about these black and white drawings, is they could take color at some point. I'm in a movie coming up next year, and the movie is about a young artist that makes a gigantic mural. So I was on a movie set for 4 months, and I made this gigantic color mural. So that's going to be coming out in March or April next year.
What's the name?
It's called Landscape with Invisible Hands. It's based off of a sci-fi novel, and the director fell in love with my work because of the connection with sci-fi and alien, exaggerated figures. The tone of my work fits the tone of the movie, so I was kind of the perfect artist to help make work for that film.
So are you in the movie, or you just made
I am.
art for the movie?
I did
Are you
both.
the lead?
I'm not the lead, but I was working with the lead to teach him how to make art. So the actor came to my studio and I taught him all the fundamentals and how to hold a brush, how to hold a roller. On set, I was kind of the action drawer, that's what I called myself. I would make the drawings and give them to the actor. He would pretend like he made the drawings. And they would film, and then between cuts, we would talk about it, and I would give him pointers. And it was such a beautiful kind of experience because I was on all sides of the film. Like, I made the work for the film. I was on set every day helping or using my observation with the director. He would ask my opinion about different things. So I was helping doing that. And then I saw the raw cut of the film, and to see that work on that level was just like goosebumps to me to see it. So it's going to be beautiful. I felt honored to be a part of that. But it was from, his name is Corey Finley. I think he makes, he was doing reality shows for a bit. This is probably his second full feature. But we became friends and he loved my work, so that was how they found me. Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the fantasy stuff that influences you? And stuff?
Yes, I don't know if you're familiar with Afrofuturism. A lot of the artists that started that I'm friends with. The leader of it that people don't talk about very much because he doesn't really come out very much is Raymond Saunders. He's someone that I became close with. He lives in Oakland, California.
That's where I'm from.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Then you should go look him up.
Yeah.
He's very generous. I think he's approaching late 80s, so doesn't go out very much. But Afrocobra is something that I was really obsessed with, and the sci-fi readings that they were talking about when I was in undergraduate school, I collected. Let's see, Kerry James Marshall, he has a comic book that's really beautiful. Trenton Doyle Hancock, I don't know if you know that artist, but he's also a person that is obsessed with sci-fi, and we talk about the exaggeration of black sci-fi films.
You know, John Jennings?
I've only heard of John Jennings. I haven't
He
met
used
him
to be
yet.
at the U a lot.
Okay, yeah, I think
He does all the
Patrick.
comic books.
Right, Patrick told me
Octavia
about that.
Butler, and
Yes.
he's really cool.
He collaborates with Stacey Robinson.
Yes.
Who's also going to be an art exhibit. So, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Earlier, you said something about each story, and I just wondered what that, does each piece refer to each story, or how do you think of story? And also, you've mentioned narrative, so do you think this is, do you have a narrative in your head for what we're seeing here?
I do, and it's sometimes sometimes it's clear when I leave the piece and I think about it. I think that's an artist cliche, but this one is more about my travels and balancing the chaos in my life. So that's me balancing on the hand of the shadow figure. So it's kind of a self-portrait of things that are happening to me currently. I just moved into a new apartment, and during this time of moving into an apartment, I'm dealing with a lot of things outside of that, like my art life and the chaos that happens with trying to manage a lot of people and travel and have your real life at the same time. So it's basically a self-portrait. And the middle part is the observers observing something, so I'm the observer observing them. So it's about these moments that I'm thinking about and trying to capture. But I want the story to be universal. I want people to come in and use their thoughts and think about how these characters make them feel so that they can make their own story. And if it links up to what I'm thinking, awesome. If it doesn't, great. But as long as someone's thinking and feeling and making their 2 cents become 25 cents, that makes me happy. I think of them being with me more than me depicting them. I always think my gathering of figures are a family, and I kind of use size to maybe talk about that if the human that was looking at it could put that in there. But I don't really depict images of that, but I feel like it's implied.
You're doing this, is it moving you towards something else?
Oh, I think it's moving towards a permanent place in a larger institution. Like they all get painted over.
Right.
So move into the big one that's gonna stay somewhere. And then I'll probably stop. But I'm not sure. So I'm really busy making them right now. There are only 2 that are living with people right now. Both are powder rooms. One's in Fort Lauderdale and one is in Atlanta. And they live with it every day. So those are the only 2 that are still standing. Everything else gets painted over.
I know you said that it's part of the process
Yes.
to paint over, but is it a little hard to part with them?
No.
No.
Mhm. It's a way of just letting go and not being bound, and I just like the freedom of it and the non-responsibility of it. But
Was it hard the first time?
no, because in the first time it was intended to just be painted over. But so that taught me, like when I knew that that was the situation, it gave me the strength to understand that it's going to go away and then make that a part of the process.
You ever think of writing a book
I want to so bad.
and just like put your drawings, all the ones you had
Yes.
in it?
Yes.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask, you ever illustrated a graphic novel
I have not. I've only made drawings for friends' records. I would love to write a book, and I feel like in my imagination, these are books that are being written. I would love it if a writer could just follow my footsteps and write about it for me so that I wouldn't have to. My friend Frederick Brower has flown around with me a little bit to document past ones. He's a really good architect photographer, like he shoots architecture. So he loves light, and he can think about how the space operates. So when I don't have him, I just trust that the institution will have somebody that can shoot it. But I have a stack of them on photographic paper, and that's the leftover memory, is the photograph. But, you know, I think about performance artists, like Trisha Brown is one of my favorites, and her performances are documented, and that's all we have. But she uses drawing as her body and moves herself around the room and makes beautiful marks. So I think about that 60s moment where performance artists just made photographs of their activities, and that's the evidence. So the photograph in my brain. Lisa, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I was curious about, like, somehow when I look at this, there's such a curiosity. You know, they're like looking at something, here they're all looking in the same direction, the one's looking at the other one for the reaction. And I'm not exactly sure how you capture that, but it just seems like there's a youthful quality, you know, like a learning quality or sense of awe. Is that intentional? Or
It is.
That, okay.
It's very intentional. I look at how animals respond to things, and they have this very childlike curiosity when they're either hunting something or one has something, they're all looking, and I feel like humans do that too. When we're at a ball game and you're like, hey, look at this, everybody looks. But there's this curiosity that I love when we have to show something to somebody and they're all like, ah. So that's something that I keep in my mind because I want that to be the expression that happens. Yes.
I feel like if I don't ask this, I'll regret it.
Okay.
So the figure where this head is just going circular.
Yes.
There are no, is that, he's looking all these different ways, or is it not finished, or is there something, why is he different, or he or she?
That's a good question. That is my, I call it the anonymous figure because it hasn't become anything. And it's like when I'm drawing, searching for a face, I'll sit and I'll just do these lines until I find something. And when I was doing this one day, I was thinking, I should just let that be a character. And it has become a character in the work. So if you're familiar, or if you look back and you look at my past wall drawings, you'll see that character somewhere in the composition. And that's another thing about writing is I feel like I have to have a few characters that I repeat. So I redraw certain people over and over again, just so that when the historians start to look at the past of my work, they'll see repeated characters and think about, oh, he was bringing these people with him through this journey. So that's who that guy is, or human. Well, Blade Runner is something that my friends and I were obsessed with, and everything about that movie is like still in me from the day I watched it the first time to the time I repeated it 3 or 4 times. Brazil, do you know that film? Yes. So that's another film that's kind of sci-fi to me. I think about that a lot.
I was wondering how your experience with life drawing has influenced all of your work, or is there any advice you could give to those students who are taking our figure drawing class, our life drawing class, and with that overlap there?
I think the proportional scale of drawing the body to make sure that limbs are accurate, even when you exaggerate them. That's very important, and it starts with the head. So when I look at my figures, I usually take a measurement of the head, and I usually try to match it up with the body so that my anatomy is correct that way.
Okay.
So I think when you're doing animation, the same thing is make sure that your proportional scale works with the figures that you're using, and then exaggerate it so that there is a connection to knowledge and experience. So that's where life drawing works for me, is I can make a figure 40 feet tall and it still have the proportional scale correct.
Great. Anyone, one last question? Anything? All right, great. Well, thank you so much.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.